The summer of '84 pressed down on Willow Creek like a damp, heavy blanket, clinging to everything. The asphalt roads shimmered with heat haze, the tar softening under the tires of the few cars that dared to venture out, and Mrs. Gable's meticulously arranged petunias, usually a riot of defiant color, hung limp and defeated in their window boxes. For Clara, just turned 16, the season felt less like the promised freedom of school holidays and more like a slow, inescapable drag, each day melting into the next with the same oppressive predictability. Her mornings began with the sun, a relentless yellow square that baked her bedroom window, turning the small space into an oven even before she was fully awake. Below, she'd hear the distant, familiar drone of her father's Ford Cortina sputtering to life, its engine a rough cough before settling into a steady rumble as he backed out of the driveway for his shift at the lumber mill. Then came the quieter, almost ritualistic clatter of her mother, Eleanor, in the kitchen, the soft scrape of a pan, the measured pour of coffee, the faint scent of toast drifting upstairs. Willow Creek was a town where everyone knew everyone, where generations lived and died within the same few streets, and everyone's story felt not just known, but already written, sealed shut like a yellowed letter. Clara often found herself gazing out her window at the ancient willow tree by the creek, its long, slender branches trailing into the sluggish, warm water, imagining a different life beyond the town limits, a life she couldn't quite articulate but felt deeply, a persistent ache just beneath her ribs. Her own aspirations, vague and unformed like mist over the creek at dawn, felt like fragile whispers against the solid, unyielding silence of her home, especially when her father, Arthur, was around. Their conversations were typically functional, clipped exchanges about homework, chores, or the oppressive weather. Anything deeper felt like trying to chip away at granite with a blunt spoon, yielding nothing but a dull, frustrating scrape. One sweltering afternoon, the kind where the air itself seemed too thick to breathe, Eleanor called Clara downstairs from her perch by the window. "Clara, could you come down here a minute?" Her voice, usually soft, carried a slight edge of exasperation, no doubt a symptom of the heat. Clara found her mother standing in the narrow hallway, a bead of sweat tracing a path down her temple. The attic hatch, usually sealed tight against the summer heat and the dust of forgotten years, hung open, a gaping rectangle of darkness framed by peeling, yellowed paint. A faint, musty smell already seeped down, promising an even greater intensity above. "Your Aunt Margaret called," Eleanor said, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "She wants her old sewing machine back. Says she needs it for some quilt she's making for your cousin. It's up there somewhere, probably under a mountain of old linens and newspapers. And for goodness sake, be careful." The last part was less a plea and more a weary command. Clara sighed, a small, involuntary exhalation that already seemed to stir the dust in her throat. The attic. It was a forgotten world up there, a graveyard of family history, filled with boxes of yellowed photographs, moth-eaten blankets, and furniture too broken to repair but too sentimental to discard. The air up there was thick and still, heavy with the scent of cedar, forgotten paper, and something metallic, like old coins left too long in a forgotten purse. Sunlight, filtered through a grimy dormer window that faced the neighbor's overgrown garden, cut dusty, golden shafts through the gloom, illuminating dancing motes that had probably been suspended there for decades. She pulled down the rickety wooden stairs, the wood groaning under her weight as she ascended, each step a protest against the intrusion. Once at the top, she paused, blinking in the dimness, her eyes adjusting. The heat was even more intense here, pressing in from all sides. She moved through the labyrinth of forgotten things, a silent archivist in a museum of her own family's past. She pushed aside a stack of colorful board games from the '60s, their boxes faded and corners crushed, then a small, dust-covered box labeled, "Clara's Baby Clothes," a fleeting pang of something unidentifiable stirring within her. An ancient, static-laden radio, its bakelite casing cracked, sat on a trunk, its dial frozen on a frequency that no longer existed. The sewing machine, a clunky, black singer with a foot pedal, was nowhere in sight. Clara rummaged further, her hands brushing against forgotten textures: brittle lace, rough burlap, the smooth, cold surface of a ceramic doll's head. Then, tucked behind an old steamer trunk that smelled faintly of mothballs and distant voyages, her fingers brushed against a long, rectangular shape, covered in a thick, canvas-like material. It felt heavy, substantial, not like a stack of blankets or a box of old books. Curiosity, a rare, flickering spark in her otherwise monotonous day, flared, pushing aside the heat and the dust. She pulled it out, dragging it with a grunt into a slanting beam of sunlight that illuminated its full form. It was a guitar case, old and scuffed, the faux leather exterior cracked in places, revealing glimpses of the cardboard beneath. The latches were tarnished, almost black with age, but it was undeniably a musical instrument case. Clara frowned. No one in their house played. Arthur listened to the news on the radio, his face grimly attentive to reports of inflation and international politics. Eleanor hummed hymns while she did the laundry or washed dishes, her voice a soft, almost unconscious melody. Music, beyond the occasional pop song that drifted from the neighbor's open window or the tinny radio in the kitchen, wasn't a part of their world. Not really. Her heart thumped a little faster, a strange, unexpected rhythm in her chest. With a click and a faint creak, she unlatched the rusty clasps. Inside, nestled in faded, once vibrant velvet, lay an acoustic guitar. It was a beautiful instrument, a rich, dark wood mahogany, perhaps, or rosewood with a delicate, pearlescent inlay shimmering around the sound hole. One string was broken, hanging limply like a snapped thread, but the others gleamed faintly, reflecting the dusty sunlight. The fretboard felt smooth and cool under her fingertips as she tentatively reached out, a quiet reverence in her touch. It smelled of old wood and something else, something faintly sweet and poignant, like forgotten dreams waiting to be reawakened. A small, worn leather pick, embossed with a faded initial, A, lay in the compartment beneath the neck. Arthur. It had to be his. But why had she never seen it? Why had it been hidden away up here, gathering dust in the cool, still air of the attic? Clara carefully closed the case, the click echoing a little too loudly in the quiet space, her mind buzzing with a strange mix of discovery and unease. The guitar, a relic of an unknown past, felt suddenly heavy in her hands. She found the sewing machine quickly after that, almost as an afterthought, its weight mundane compared to the mysteries held within the guitar case, and dragged it downstairs, the thud of each step on the wooden treads a counterpoint to the questions forming in her head. Later that evening, over a dinner of Eleanor's reliable meatloaf and boiled potatoes, the scent of ketchup and thyme filling the small kitchen, Clara tried to bring it up. The television hummed softly from the living room, a familiar backdrop. "Mom," she started, her voice a little too casual, a little too bright, as if she were talking about the weather. "I found an old guitar up in the attic. Was it Dad's?" Eleanor paused, her fork, laden with a piece of potato, halfway to her mouth. A flicker, quick as a match strike, crossed her face: surprise, then something else, something like resignation, a faint shadow passing over her features before settling back into a placid, almost forced calm. She swallowed slowly. "That old thing? Your father used to dabble. A long, long time ago. Before you were born. It's nothing, Clara, just an old hobby." Her gaze flickered to Arthur, who kept his own gaze fixed on his plate, methodically cutting his meatloaf into precise, even squares. He didn't say a word, didn't even acknowledge the question, his silence a heavy, impenetrable wall. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual, pressing down on the small kitchen table, making the air thick with unspoken things, with the clinking of cutlery on ceramic plates the only sound. Clara felt a strange mix of confusion and a prickle of annoyance. Dabble? The guitar looked like more than a dabble. It looked like a passion, carefully stored, yet utterly abandoned. The music, she realized with a sudden, cold certainty, had never been played. Not in her lifetime. That night, unable to sleep, the quiet hum of the house amplifying her restless thoughts, Clara crept back upstairs. The floorboards groaned beneath her bare feet, each creak a potential betrayal. A flashlight, clutched tight in her hand, cut a narrow beam through the darkness of the attic. She opened the case again, the familiar smell of old wood, of dust and forgotten dreams, filling her nostrils. Her fingers, trembling slightly, traced the contours of the instrument. Tucked beneath the headstock, wrapped in a brittle, yellowed cloth that crumbled slightly at her touch, she found a stack of sheet music. It was handwritten, scrawled with notes and chord diagrams, a testament to someone's patient effort. The title on the top sheet was Willow Creek Blues. Next to it, tucked into the folds of the cloth, a faded, creased photograph. It showed a younger Arthur, maybe early 20s, with longer hair that brushed his collar, a wide, uncharacteristic grin splitting his face, holding this very guitar. He was standing with two other young men, one with a bass slung low, the other with drumsticks poised, in front of a brightly lit sign that read, "The Blue Heron Tavern Live Music Tonight." Arthur looked vibrant, alive, a stranger to the quiet man who ate dinner in silence, a man she barely recognized as her father. This was no dabble, this was a life, and it had been meticulously erased. The discovery of the photograph and the sheet music ignited something restless within Clara. The attic, once a place of mundane storage, a repository for forgotten holiday decorations and outgrown clothes, became a vault of secrets, and the guitar, a silent witness, now hummed with untold stories. She spent the next few days re-examining the guitar, running her fingers over the smooth, worn wood, feeling the faint indentations where her father's younger hands had fretted chords, imagining the melodies that had once flowed from it. She tried to pluck the remaining strings, producing only discordant twangs, jarring against the quiet of the house, but the act itself felt significant, a small rebellion against the profound, unsettling silence that surrounded the guitar. She began to notice the small details of the era with a newfound awareness, as if seeing them through a different lens. The way the afternoon sunlight hit the rotary phone on the kitchen wall, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The specific, low hum of the refrigerator, a constant companion in the background. The crackle of the local radio station, tuned to a pop music channel, playing Fleetwood Mac or Supertramp, the familiar songs suddenly feeling like pieces of a larger, more complex puzzle she was trying to solve. Her attempts to casually bring up music or the guitar were met with increasing resistance, a subtle but firm wall that her parents erected around the subject. Eleanor would change the subject with practiced ease, her voice taking on a strained cheerfulness, suggesting they discuss school or what to have for supper. Arthur, if he was in the room, would simply leave, excusing himself to the garage or retreating behind the impenetrable wall of his newspaper, the rustle of the pages a deliberate barrier. The air around the subject was charged, like a wire humming with unspoken electricity, a tension Clara could almost taste. Clara felt a growing sense of frustration, mixed with a deeper, more unsettling feeling of betrayal of sorts. Why had this vibrant, joyful part of her father been hidden from her? Why was it so painful to acknowledge, so carefully guarded? One afternoon, a sharp, unseasonable chill in the air, she walked down to Willow Creek's Main Street, a short strip of brick buildings housing the general store, the post office, and Henderson's Hardware. The bell above the door jingled a cheerful, old-fashioned tune as she entered. Mr. Henderson, a man with wispy white hair that perpetually escaped his scalp and a perpetually ink-stained apron tied around his waist, looked up from behind the counter. He had known her father his whole life, had watched Clara grow up. Clara bought a new string for the guitar, feigning a sudden, casual interest in learning, trying to keep her voice light. "Oh, a guitar, eh?" Mr. Henderson chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Didn't know you were musical, Clara. Your dad, now he was something else. Used to tear up the stage at the Blue Heron, back in the day. Arthur Hayes, the best guitarist Willow Creek ever saw. Folks would come from miles around to hear his band, the Creek Jumpers." Clara's heart leapt, a sudden, wild bird in her chest. The name, the Creek Jumpers, resonated with the image in the photograph. The Creek Jumpers? She echoed, trying to keep her voice steady, her excitement barely contained. What happened to them? Mr. Henderson's smile faded slightly, replaced by a distant, thoughtful look. He ran a hand over his wispy hair. Ah, well, life, I suppose. Things change. He was good, though. Real good. Had a future, some said. He shrugged, a slight lift of his shoulders, then returned to his ledger, the scratching of his pen against paper filling the small silence, leaving Clara with a tantalizing glimpse into a vibrant past that sharply contrasted with the quiet, resigned man she knew, a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world in his slumped shoulders. Back home, the weight of Mr. Henderson's words settling deep within her, Clara carefully replaced the broken string, her hands clumsy but determined. The fine wire felt alien in her fingers, but she persevered. She found an old, Teach Yourself Guitar book from her school library, its pages dog-eared and smelling faintly of mildew, and began to learn basic chords. Her fingers ached, pressing against the unforgiving strings, but a fierce satisfaction grew with each clear note she managed to produce, each strum that sounded less like a protest and more like music. The guitar, once a silent relic, was slowly coming back to life under her touch, its wooden body vibrating with nascent sound. The sound, tentative and hesitant, felt like a bridge between her and the ghost of her father's youth, a whisper from a forgotten time. She started looking through old family photo albums, the thick, leather-bound books usually reserved for holiday gatherings or special occasions. She found a few more pictures of Arthur with his band, candid shots of them laughing, vibrant, full of a youthful energy she'd never witnessed in him. They were posed in front of the Blue Heron, on a small stage, their faces alight with the joy of performance. One photo, however, stood out. It was a newspaper clipping, brittle and yellowed, tucked into the very back of an album, almost as if someone had tried to hide it. It was dated 1978. The headline, stark and bold, read, Blue Heron Tavern Incident. Local band's gig ends in chaos. The article was short, vague, mentioning a dispute and minor damage, but it specifically named the Creek Jumpers and Arthur Hayes. No details, just a sense of something gone terribly wrong, a lingering stain on what should have been a celebration. This wasn't just about life getting in the way. Something specific, something damaging, had happened. The next evening, the newspaper clipping clutched tight in her hand, Clara confronted her mother again. Eleanor was knitting in her armchair, the rhythmic click of the needles a soothing sound that Clara was about to shatter. Mom, Clara began, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and resolve, what happened at the Blue Heron? Why did Dad stop playing? Henderson said he was amazing, that he had a future. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. The knitting needles stilled in her hands, the yarn pooling in her lap. Her shoulders slumped, a slow, heavy descent that seemed to diminish her. She looked up at Clara, her eyes clouded with a deep, familiar sadness. Clara, please. It was a long time ago. Your father, he had a dream. A big one. He was going to try out for a record label in the city, had an audition lined up. The Creek Jumpers had a big send-off gig at the Blue Heron, a real celebration before they left. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, a strained memory. But there was an argument. A terrible fight with the other guitarist, Mark. Something about money, or a girl. I don't know the exact details, I wasn't there. But it got ugly. Really ugly. Punches were thrown. The place got trashed a bit. The police were called. Arthur was devastated. He'd put everything into that band, everything he had. A single tear tracked a path down Eleanor's cheek, catching the light. And then, a few weeks later, we found out I was pregnant with you. Eleanor's voice was soft, laced with a profound, almost unbearable sadness, a quiet grief that had been carried for years. He said he couldn't chase a dream anymore. He had to be responsible. He packed the guitar away that very week. Said he couldn't look at it. Said he couldn't bear to play music that felt tainted by bitterness. He got the job at the mill. For us. For you. The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp ache in her chest. The silence wasn't just about a forgotten hobby, a casual pastime dismissed with a wave of the hand. It was about a shattered dream, a painful sacrifice, and a profound, enduring sense of loss. Her father hadn't just given up, he had been forced to choose, and the choice had left a wound that never truly healed, a deep, unacknowledged scar beneath the surface of his quiet life. The weight of that sacrifice made for her, for their family, settled heavily on Clara's shoulders, a sudden, immense burden that changed everything. She looked at the guitar resting against her bed, no longer seeing just a dark, wooden instrument, but a tangible symbol of a vibrant life once imagined, a song that had almost, but never quite, been sung. The tension that had coiled within her for weeks began to unravel, shifting its shape entirely. It wasn't about forcing her father to reclaim a forgotten past, not anymore. It was about understanding the vast, unspoken pain that had settled deep within him, about finding a way to acknowledge that music, to honor the dreams that had been laid aside. That night, she watched him from the kitchen doorway as he sat in his worn armchair, the evening paper held steady in his hands. The familiar lines etched around his eyes seemed deeper, but for the first time, Clara saw beyond the quiet, distant man who brought home a paycheck. She saw the ghost of a young musician, whose future, once bright with the promise of melody, had been quietly exchanged for the steady grind of the mill and a silent, profound regret. The air in the house still felt heavy, but the weight was different now, infused with a new, somber understanding, rather than the sharp, frustrating edge of mystery. The revelation about the blue heron, about Mark, and the abrupt, life-altering shift to fatherhood had cast a long, complex shadow over everything Clara thought she knew about her dad. The old guitar, now carefully placed in her room, was no longer just a dusty relic from the attic. It was a monument to a sacrifice, a choice made in the crucible of youth and responsibility, forged in the heat of a moment that had shaped their entire family. She continued to practice, her fingers slowly gaining a new, tentative dexterity on the frets. The simple, familiar chords of House of the Rising Sun, or the raucous strum of Wild Thing, would echo softly in her bedroom, a quiet counterpoint to the drone of the television downstairs. She didn't harbor grand ambitions of becoming a musician herself, but the act of playing, of drawing sound from the instrument that had once been her father's voice, felt like a profound communion. It was a quiet, almost sacred act of empathy, a way to reach across the years and touch the unspoken. The music she made wasn't his, not really, but it carried the undeniable echo of his unspoken dreams, a ghost of a melody yearning for release. One late afternoon, the air still thick and humid with the last, lingering heat of summer, Clara was hunched over her bed, meticulously working through the intricate chords of Willow Creek blues. The old, handwritten sheet music, fragile and yellowed with age, was spread out beside her, its faded ink a testament to another time. The melody was a melancholic, haunting thing, beautiful in its raw expression of longing and regret, a tune that seemed to pull at something deep inside her. She stumbled over a particularly complex chord change, her fingers fumbling awkwardly, the strings buzzing in protest. Just as a sigh of frustration escaped her lips, a floorboard creaked softly outside her door. She looked up, startled, her heart giving a small jump, to see Arthur standing in the doorway. His tall silhouette was framed against the softer light of the hallway, a stark contrast to the late afternoon sun streaming into her room. He hadn't made a sound as he approached, moving with a quietness that was both unnerving and characteristic. His eyes, usually so guarded and unreadable, were fixed on the guitar in her hands, then slowly, deliberately, shifted to the worn sheet music. A flicker of something unreadable surprise, yes, but also a deep vein of pain and a profound, aching nostalgia crossed his face, softening the hard lines around his mouth just for a moment. "That old thing," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, utterly devoid of its usual gruffness. It was a sound Clara rarely heard, a voice stripped bare of its protective layers. He walked into the room, slowly, deliberately, each step measured, as if entering a space that held a fragile, sacred memory. He reached out a hand, not to touch the guitar she held, but to gently pick up the faded photograph of the Creek jumpers from her bedside table. His fingers, usually so strong and calloused from the mill, held the picture with a delicate care. He studied it, his gaze lingering on the youthful faces, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor running through his hand. "Mark," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, as he traced a finger over one of the smiling faces in the picture. "He was a good rhythm player. My best friend, once." He looked up, his gaze meeting Clara's, and for the first time, she saw a raw, exposed vulnerability in his eyes she'd never witnessed before. It was like looking into a deep, clear well. "We had a fight," he continued, his voice still low, but gaining a tremor of its own. "A stupid, drunken fight. Over nothing, really. Or everything, at the time. Pride, ego, a girl who didn't care about either of us. It broke the band. Broke everything." He paused, his gaze drifting back to the photograph, lost in the ghost of a memory. "And then? You were coming." He sighed, a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to carry the full, crushing weight of years of unspoken sorrow and sacrifice. "I couldn't pick it up again. Every note felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. What I'd ruined. And then, what I had to give up to make sure you had a life, a steady one. It felt like a betrayal to play it. Like I was choosing something frivolous over what truly mattered." Clara carefully, gently, placed the guitar down beside her on the bed. The buzzing of the strings was gone, replaced by a profound quiet. "It wasn't a betrayal, Dad," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, but imbued with a new, quiet firmness. Her eyes, clear and direct, held his. "It was a choice. But it doesn't mean the music has to stay silent forever." She reached for the guitar again, her fingers finding the familiar, melancholic chords of the blues song. She played the opening notes, hesitant at first, a little rough, but then, as the melody began to take shape, her confidence grew. The haunting, beautiful melody, her father's melody, slowly, steadily, filled the small room, weaving itself into the late afternoon light. Arthur watched her, his gaze unwavering, a profound stillness about him that was unlike any she had ever seen. He didn't offer advice, didn't try to correct her fumbling notes or the occasional missed strain. He simply listened, truly listened, for the first time in years, his face a complex map of memory and present emotion. Eleanor, drawn by the unusual, resonant sound, appeared silently in the doorway, a look of quiet wonder slowly spreading across her face. She leaned against the wooden frame, her eyes, usually so practical and steady, welling with unshed tears. She watched her daughter, her Clara, play her husband's forgotten song, the melody a quiet offering. The music Clara played was imperfect, a little rough around the edges, yes, but it was honest. It was a bridge, not just between her and her father, but between the fractured past and the uncertain present, between a shattered dream and a hopeful, tender future. When she finished, the last, lingering note hanging in the air like a suspended breath, a profound silence settled over the room. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of unspoken things, of secrets buried deep, but a quiet, understanding one, rich with shared emotion. Arthur looked from the guitar to Clara, a faint, almost imperceptible smile finally touching his lips, softening the deep lines around his eyes. "You got a good ear, kid," he said, his voice still low, but softer, warmer than she had ever heard it. He didn't reach for the guitar, didn't offer to play, and Clara, understanding, didn't ask him to. The music, in a way that truly mattered, had finally been played. Not by him, not with the bitterness of the past, but through her, with a new understanding and an unspoken, tender promise. The summer of '84 eventually gave way to autumn, the leaves on the old willow tree by the creek turning a vibrant, fragile gold. Clara continued to play the guitar, finding her own voice in its resonant strings, weaving her own quiet stories into its melodies. The attic, while still a repository of forgotten things and dusty memories, no longer held a painful secret. It held a legacy, a quiet testament to a father's love. Arthur still went to the mill each morning, still read his newspaper in the evening, but the silence between him and Clara had softened, warmed, becoming less a barrier and more a comfortable space. There were more glances exchanged across the dinner table, more shared moments of quiet companionship, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air that now hummed with a different kind of understanding. The guitar remained Clara's, a symbol of connection, a testament to the music that, though never played by its original owner, had finally found its way out into the world, weaving new, hopeful melodies into the quiet, unchanging fabric of Willow Creek. Sometimes, late in the evening, Arthur would pause by her open door, listening to the soft, imperfect strumming. He never said anything, just stood there for a moment, a faint smile playing on his lips before quietly turning away. If this story left any impression on you, or reminded you of a moment from your own life, feel free to share it in the comments. Even a small memory is enough. Stories from the past often carry meaning we only begin to understand much later. Your memory might become part of someone else's story. If you'd like to catch a new story at the same time every day, subscribe and turn on notifications.